In the previous skill refreshers, we've just been looking at expressions, and now we're going to look at equations. Now, the difference between an expression and an equation is the equal sign, right? That's why it's called an equation, because it has an equal sign in it. And so when you solve an equation, what you're trying to do is find a value for the variable that satisfies that equation, all right? That makes that equation true. Now, you've solved linear equations in the past, I'm sure, where you add or subtract something from both sides, and then, or you can multiply or divide both sides by something, and you rearrange the equation until you isolate x. And but that doesn't work very well with quadratic equations. So what we have to do with a quadratic equation is factor it and then use this zero product property. All right, the zero product property just says that if you have two factors, right, that multiply to 0, then one of those two factors has to be 0. All right, and that's what we're going to use to solve a quadratic equation. So let's take a look at these examples. All right, so first thing we're going to do with these is factor them, and then we're going to use the zero product property. So let's factor this quadratic here. We got all the terms. Notice I have all of the terms on the left-hand side here, and then on the right-hand side it's just 0. All right. Now, because if we're going to use the zero product property, we have to have some product equal to 0, right? So that's what you want. And so I don't need to do anything to this quadratic equation. It's already in the form that I want it in. So what I need to do then is just factor this quadratic, and we're going to use the zero product property. All right, so I need to factor this. So I'm looking at, it has a leading coefficient of 1. And so I'm going to look at the factors of 16. I want factors of 16 that add to 10. Right, so I could list those out. 16 is 1 times 16, or 2 times 8, or 4 times 4, right? And so which one of those add to 10? Well, it looks like 2 times 8 adds up, or 2 times 8 is 16, and then 2 plus 8 is 10. So I'm going to factor this into x plus 2 times x plus 8, and that's going to be equal to 0, right? So that factorization is equivalent, right, to the x squared plus 10x plus 16. Now I'm going to use the zero product property. So I have two factors, right? I have two factors. This is one factor. This is another factor. So I know that if this equation is true, then one of these two factors has to be equal to 0. So either x plus 2 is equal to 0 or x plus 8 is equal to 0. All right. And those are now just two linear equations that I can solve. I can basically subtract 2 from both sides of this, and I'll get x is equal to minus 2. And I can solve the other equation. I can subtract 8 from both sides. I get x equals minus 8. Right? So my solutions are x is equal to negative 2 or negative 8. All right, and I'm done. Those are my solutions. Those two values will make that equation true, and I can always check it, right? I can always put in x equals negative 2, replace x with negative 2 in the original equation, and if I got the right answer, it should cause that left-hand side to be 0, right? Same way with negative 8. I should be able to put that in and evaluate the left-hand side, and it should be equal to 0. All right, now this next one is not quite in the form that we want it. We want to use the zero product property, so I need to rearrange this. All right, so I'm going to rearrange this by subtracting 1 from both sides. So I get 6x squared plus 5x minus 1 equals 0. All right, now if I factor the left-hand side, then I can use the zero product property. All right, so let's factor that left-hand side. All right, so this one does not have a leading coefficient of 1, so I've got to look at the product of 6 times minus 1, which is a minus 6. All right, so the factors of 6 are 1 times 6, or 2 times 3, and I want these, and it's got to be negative, right? So I want them both to be negative, so, oh, no, it's got to be sorry. It's got to be, hang on, hold on. So 6 times -1 is -6. So I want the product to be negative. So one of these two factors has to be negative. All right. But I want the sum to be positive. So if you look at this, -1 times 6 is a -6. And the sum of -1 and 6 is +5. All right. So those are the two factors that I want. Now, so it's a little bit, you have to be careful though, because 2 times 3 is 5, but remember those have to, I need a -6, right? I need the product to be a -6. And even though those add up to 5, the product would not be -6, it'd be +6. So be careful. All right. All right, so I'm going to split the middle term. So I get 6x squared, and then I'm going to get minus x, and then plus 6x minus 1 equals 0. All right, I'm going to factor by grouping, and I can see that I can pull an x out of the first two terms. I get 6x minus 1. And the last two terms, I'm just going to factor a 1 out of it, because there's no common factors. So 6x minus 1, and isn't that sweet? Now I can factor out the 6x minus 1, put parentheses around it, and then x plus 1 times x plus 1 equals 0. All right, so I have it factored, and now I just have to find the values of x that make either one of those factors equal to 0. So I want either 6x minus 1 to be equal to 0, or I want x plus 1 to be equal to 0. All right. All right, so I need to add 1 to both sides. I'll get 6x equals 1, and that means that x is equal to 1/6. Or I'll get over here, I'll get x equals minus 1. So I get two solutions. I get x equals 1/6, or actually this is minus 1 because I have to subtract 1 from both sides. So I could summarize it and say x is equal to 1/6 or a minus 1. All right, let's do another one here. Now, obviously that first one was in a nice form that I could use the zero product property on, and you can see this one is not in that form. So I need to distribute this x. So I'm going to get x squared plus 7x, and then I'm going to subtract 8 from both sides equals 0. And now I have it in the form that I want it. So if I factor that quadratic, I can use a zero product property. All right, so let's factor that. Now, this has a leading coefficient of 1, so I'm just looking for factors of -8 that add up to 7. So 1 times -8 will do it. Whoops, no, not 1 times -8. It'll be -1 times 8, add up to a +7, right? So then I know that this factors into x minus 1, and then times x plus 8 equals 0. All right, so now I have two factors, and I know that one of those two factors has to be 0 in order for their product to be 0. So either x minus 1 equals 0, or x plus 8 equals 0. All right, this would give me x equals 1, and this one gives me x equals -8. So my answers would be x equals 1, -8, one of those two. All right, so one more here. Again, we don't have it in the form we want. So I need to rearrange it a bit because I want everything to be equal to 0. It doesn't matter really whether the 0 is on the right or the left-hand side, but I want a quadratic equal to 0, and then I can factor the quadratic and use the zero product property. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 20x, and I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides, right? So then I get 3x squared minus 20x minus 7 equals 0. All right, that's an equivalent expression, or an equivalent. It's an equation in an equivalent form. All right, so now I just need to factor that, and I'm going to split the middle term. I have a leading coefficient of 3, and I can't factor, there's no common factors among all three terms. So I'm going to take 3 times negative 7. I get a negative 21, right? And so my factors are, if I just look at 21, I get 21 times 1 or 3 times 7. And it looks like I need it to add up to a negative, right? The product has to be a negative 21. So I want one of these two factors to be negative, and it has to add to a negative 20. So I'm going to make this a negative 21. Negative 21 times 1 is negative 21. Negative 21 plus 1 gives me a negative 20. All right, so I'm going to split that middle term. 3x squared minus 21x plus x minus 7 equals 0. All right, factor by grouping. 3x, and then I have x minus 7, and then I can factor a 1 out of the last two terms. So I get x minus 7. And then I'm going to factor out, right? We have two terms now, and each one of those terms has two factors. So I'm going to factor out the x minus 7, and then I'm left with 3x plus 1 equals 0. So now I just need to, let me scroll down and give myself a little more room to work here. I just need to set each one of those factors equal to 0, right? I'm using the zero product property. So x minus 7 equals 0, or 3x plus 1 equals 0. So this gives me x equals 7, and this would give me x is equal to a negative 1/3. All right, now if I kind of skipped a step there, you'll get to the point where you can solve this easy enough. But you can subtract 1 from both sides and then divide both sides by 3. So my answer is x is equal to 7, or a negative 1/3. All right, so go ahead and practice that skill, and I'll see you in the next video.